Right. Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Part 2, Chapter 3. Samsara. For a long time Siddhartha had lived the life of the world and the pleasures without actually belonging to it. His senses, which he had deadened in his ardent Samana years, had reawakened. He had tasted wealth, tasted lust, tasted power. Yet for a long time he had remained a Samana at heart. Kamala, the clever woman, had correctly recognized this. It was always the art of thinking, of waiting, of fasting, that guided his life. The worldlings, the child people, were still foreign to him, as he to them. The years ran by. Enveloped in well-being, Siddhartha barely sensed their disappearance. He had grown rich. He had long since had his own house and his own servants and a garden on the river outside the town. People liked him. They came to him when they needed money or advice. But no one was close to him except Kamala. That high, clear alertness that he had once experienced in the prime of his youth, in the days after Gautama's sermon, after his separation from Govinda, that alert expectation, that proud independence without teachings or teachers, that supple willingness to hear the godly voice in his own heart, had gradually become memories, had been ephemeral. Far and faint murmured the holy wellspring, which had once been near, which had once murmured inside him. Granted, many things that he had learned from the Samanas, that he had learned from Gautama, that he had learned from his father, the Brahman, had lingered in him on and on. Moderate living, joy of thinking, hours of meditating, secret knowing of the self, of the eternal ego, which is neither body nor consciousness. Some of these things had lasted in him, but others had gone under and were covered with dust. The potter's wheel, once set in motion, keeps spinning and only gradually slackens and comes to a halt. And likewise, in Siddhartha's soul, the wheel of asceticism, the wheel of thinking, the wheel of discrimination had kept turning and turning, was still turning, but was now sluggish and hesitant and on the verge of halting. Slowly, the way moisture creeps into the dying tree stump, slowly filling it and rotting it, worldliness and slothfulness had crept into Siddhartha's soul. Slowly they filled his soul, made it heavy, made it weary, lulled it to sleep. By contrast, his senses had come alive. They had learned a lot, experienced a lot. Siddhartha had learned how to do business, wield power over people, take pleasure with a woman. He had learned how to wear beautiful clothes, command servants, bathe in fragrant water. He had learned how to eat delicately and meticulously prepared dishes, including fish, including meat and fowl, sweets and spices, and to drink wine, which makes you slothful and forgetful. He had learned how to dice and play chess, watch dancing girls, be carried in a sedan, sleep on a soft bed. Yet he still felt different from others and superior to them. He had always watched them with a touch of scoffing, with a touch of scorn, the very scorn that a Samana always feels toward people of the world. When Kamaswami was ailing, when he was angry, when he felt offended, when he was plagued by his merchant worries, Siddhartha had watched him scornfully. Only slowly and imperceptibly, with the passing harvest seasons and rainy seasons, had his scorn grown weary, had his superiority grown stiller. Only slowly, amid his grown riches, had Siddhartha taken on something of the ways of the child people, something of their childishness and their anxiety. And yet he envied them all the more he resembled them. He envied them for the one thing that he lacked and that they had, the importance they were able to place on their lives, the passionateness of their joys and fears, the queasy but sweet happiness of being eternally in love. These men were constantly in love with themselves, with women, with their children, with honor or money, with plans or hopes, but this was not what he learned from them. Not this. this childlike joy and folly, what he learned from them were the unpleasant things, the things that he himself despised. It happened more and more often that in the morning, after a convivial evening, he would lie and linger on in bed, feeling stupid and tired. It happened that he became annoyed and impatient when Kamaswami bored him with his worries. It happened that he laughed all too loudly when he lost at dice. His face was still wiser and more spiritual than others, but it seldom laughed, and it took on, one after another, those features found so often in the faces of the rich, those features of discontent, sickliness, sulkiness, sluggishness, lovelessness. Slowly, he was stricken with the spiritual illness of the rich. Like a veil, like a thin mist, weariness descended on Siddhartha, slowly, a bit denser each day, a bit dimmer each month, a bit heavier each year. A new garment grows old with time, loses its lovely color with time, gets stains, gets wrinkles, frays out at the hems, and starts showing awkward, threadbare areas. And Siddhartha's new life, begun after his parting from Govinda, had likewise grown old, and so, with the fleeting years, his life lost color and luster, and so stains and wrinkles gathered on him, and, deeply concealed, peeping out here and there and already ugly, disgust and disillusion waited. Siddhartha did not notice. He noticed only that the clear and certain inner voice, which had awoken in him long ago and had always guided him in his luminous times, had now grown still. The world had captured him. Pleasure, lustfulness, sluggishness, and finally the vice that he had always scorned and scoffed at most as the most foolish vice, greed. Property, ownership, and wealth had also finally captured him, were no longer glitter and glamour for him, had become a chain and a charge. It was though a strange and insidious path that Siddhartha had gotten into this final and most despicable dependency through dice. Siddhartha had smilingly and casually treated gambling as a custom of the child people, but once he had stopped being a samana at heart, he had begun gambling for money and precious objects, with mounting rage and passion. He was a feared player. Few dared to dice with him. His stakes were too high and too brazen. He gambled out of his heart's distress. Losing and squandering the filthy lucre brought him an angry joy. There was no plainer, no more disdainful way to show his contempt for wealth, the idol of the merchants. So he wagered high and ruthlessly, despising himself, deriding himself, raked thousands in, threw thousands away, lost money, lost jewelry, lost a villa, won back, lost again. That fear, that dreadful and oppressive fear that he felt while dicing, while fretting about high stakes, he loved that fear, and kept trying to renew it, trying to increase it, to titillate it more and more, for it was only in these sensations that he still felt something like happiness, something like euphoria, something like a heightened life in the midst of his glutted, tepid, insipid existence. And after every great loss, he schemed to obtain new wealth, more zealously conducted his dealings, more rigorously forced his debtors to pay, for he wanted to keep on gambling, he wanted to keep on squandering, keep on showing his disdain of wealth. Siddhartha lost his composure when losing at dice. He lost his patience with tardy payers, lost his good-naturedness toward beggars, lost his delight in giving or lending money to supplicants. He who lost 10,000 on a throw of dice and laughed, grew stricter and pettier in business, and sometimes dreamed of money at night. And as often as he awoke from this ugly enchantment, as often as he saw his face older and uglier in the bedroom mirror, as often as shame and disgust overwhelmed him, he kept fleeing into a new game of chance, fleeing into a daze of lust, of wine, and from there back to the drive to acquire and accumulate. In this senseless cycle, he ran himself weary, ran himself old, ran himself ill. Then one night he was warned by a dream. He had spent the evening with Kamala in her beautiful pleasure garden. They had sat conversing under the trees, and Kamala had spoken pensive words, words concealing sadness and weariness. She had asked him to talk about Gautama, and she could not hear enough about him, how pure his eyes, how still and lovely his lips, how kind his smile, how peaceful his gait. Siddhartha had to talk and talk to her about the sublime Buddha, and Kamala had sighed and had said, "Some day, perhaps soon, I too will follow this Buddha. I will give him my pleasure garden and will take refuge with his teaching." But thereupon she had teased him and gripped him with painful ardor in the game of love, amid bites and tears, as if trying to squeeze the last sweet drop from this vain and ephemeral pleasure. Never had it been so strangely clear to Siddhartha how closely lust is related to death. Next he had lain at her side, and Kamala's face had been near his, and under her eyes and next to the corners of her mouth he had more clearly than ever before read an anxious handwriting, a writing of fine lines, of quiet furrows, a writing that recalled autumn and old age, just as Siddhartha himself, though only in his 40s, had noticed grey hairs here and there in his black hair. Fatigue was written on Kamala's beautiful face, fatigue caused by going a long way that has no cheerful end, fatigue and the start of fading, and secret, unspoken, and perhaps not even conscious anxiety, fear of old age, fear of autumn, fear of death. He had parted from her with a sigh, his soul full of surfeit and full of secret anxiety. Then Siddhartha had spent the night in his house with wine and dancing girls, had played the superior to his peers, the superior man that he no longer was. He had drunk a lot of wine and gone to bed long after midnight, weary and yet agitated, on the verge of weeping and despairing, and tried but failed to find sleep. His heart was full of a misery that he thought he could no longer bear, full of a disgust that permeated him like the tepid, repulsive taste of wine, the all too sweet and bleak music, the all too soft smiles of the dancing girls, the all too sweet scent of their hair and breasts. But above all he was disgusted at himself, at his fragrant hair, at the smell of wine from his mouth, at the slack fatigue and surfeit of his skin, like someone who has eaten or drunk too much and vomits it up, tormented and yet glad about the relief. The sleepless man, in a tremendous surge of disgust, wished he were rid of these pleasures, these habits, this whole senseless life, and himself. It was not before the glow of morning and the first bustle outside his town-house that he fell asleep, that he found a half-numbing, an inkling of sleep for a few moments, and in those moments he had a dream. Kamala kept a small, rare songbird in a gold cage. He dreamed about this bird. He dreamed that this bird, which normally sang in the morning, had grown mute, and noticing this, he went over to the cage and peered inside. The little bird was dead, lying stiff on the bottom. He took it out, weighed it in his hand for a moment, and then threw it away, out into the street. And at that same moment he was terribly frightened, and his heart ached as if, with this dead bird, he had thrown away all value and all goodness. Jumping up from this dream, he felt a profound sadness. He had, it seemed to him, been leading a worthless life. Worthless and senseless. No living thing, no precious thing, nothing worth keeping had remained in his hands. He stood alone and empty, like a castaway on a shore. Gloomy, Siddhartha went to a pleasure garden belonging to him, locked the gate, sat down under a mango tree, felt death in his heart and horror in his breast, sat and sensed everything withering inside him, dying inside him, coming to an end. Gradually he gathered his thoughts and mentally reviewed the entire path of his life, from the very first days he could recall. When had he ever been happy, felt true bliss? Oh yes, he had experienced it several times. In his boyhood he had tasted it when garnering praise from the Brahmins, when he, far ahead of others his age, had excelled in reciting the sacred verses, debating with the scholars, assisting at a sacrifice. At such times he had felt it in his heart, "Before you lies a path to which you are called, the gods are awaiting you." And again, as a youth, when the goal of all reflection, soaring higher and higher, had torn him out and up from the throng of similar strivers, when he had painfully struggled to grasp the meaning of Brahma, when any attained wisdom merely triggered new thirst in him, at such times, in the midst of thirst, in the midst of pain, he had felt the same thing. Onward, onward, you are called. He had heard that voice when leaving his homeland and choosing the life of the samana, and again when going from the samanas to that perfect one, and then from him into the unknown. How long had he not heard that voice? How long had he not reached any height? How even and bleak his path had been. For many long years, with no high goal, no thirst, no exaltation, he had been content with minor pleasures and yet never satisfied. All these years, unbeknownst to himself, he had striven and yearned to become a human being like these many, like these children, and yet his life had been much poorer and more wretched than their lives, for their goals were not his, their worries not his. This whole world of Kamaswami people had only been a game for him, a dance that one watches, a comedy. Kamala alone had been dear to him, precious to him. But was she still? Did he still need her, or she him? Were they not playing a game without end? Was it necessary to live for that? No, it was not necessary. This game was called Samsara, a game for children, a game that might be lovely to play once, twice, tenfold, but again and again? Now Siddhartha knew that the game was done, that he could play it no longer. A shudder ran through his body. Inside him he felt something had died. All that day he sat under the mango tree, remembering his father, remembering Govinda, remembering Gautama. Had he left them merely to become a Kamaswami? He was still sitting as night set in. When he looked up and spotted the stars, he thought, "Here I sit under my mango tree in my pleasure garden." He smiled faintly. Was it really necessary? Was it right? Was it not a foolish game to own a mango tree, to own a garden? He was done with them too. They died in him too. He rose, said farewell to the mango tree, farewell to the pleasure garden. Since he had not eaten all day, he felt vehement hunger. And he recalled his house in town, his chamber and his bed, the table with food. He smiled wearily, shook himself, and said farewell to these things. That same hour of night, Siddhartha left his garden, left the town, and never came back. For a long time, Kamaswami, who thought he had fallen into the hands of highwaymen, sent out men to look for him. But Kamala sent no one to look for him. When she learned that Siddhartha had disappeared, she was not surprised. Had she not always expected it? Was he not a samana, a homeless wanderer, a pilgrim? She had felt this most intensely at their last meeting, and amid the pain of her loss, she was glad that she had drawn him so ardently to her heart that last time, that she had felt so thoroughly possessed and permeated by him. When she heard the first news of Siddhartha's disappearance, she stepped over to the window, where she kept a rare songbird in a gold cage. She opened the door of the cage, took out the bird, and let it fly. She watched and watched it, the flying bird. From that day on, she received no more visitors and kept her house locked. After a time, she realized that she was pregnant from her last meeting with Siddhartha.